Hello again. We're going to start with the child risk behaviors, and we're going to start with suicide risk, which is the first item. And here we go, child risk behavior, suicide risk. 0, no evidence. 1, history but no recent ideation or gesture. 2, recent ideation or gesture but not in the past 24 hours. 3, current ideation and intent or command hallucinations that involve self-harm. The next item is self-mutilation. Self-mutilation. No evidence on 0. 1, history. 2, engaged in self-mutilation and does not require medical attention, and the difference with 3 is that it would require medical attention. Other self-harm takes in consideration that there may be behaviors of self-mutilation or suicidal, and in 0 is no evidence of other behaviors besides those that would place the child at risk of physical harm. In 1, there's a history of behaviors other than suicide or self-mutilation that place the child at risk of physical harm. And this would also include reckless and risk-taking behaviors that may endanger the child. A child who hangs himself from a bridge in order to do graffiti, for example, or is in parties where risky sexual behaviors are going on. 2, engaged in behaviors other than suicidal self-mutilation that place him in danger of physical harm. This includes reckless behavior or intentional risk-taking behavior. And in 3, the child is engaged in behaviors other than suicidal self-mutilation that place him at immediate risk of death. This includes reckless behavior or intentional risk-taking. And now danger to others, and danger to others is the first of a slew of items that trigger supplemental modules. Here we go. 0, no evidence. 1, history of homicidal ideation, physically harmful aggression or fire setting that has put the child or others in danger of harm. 2, recent homicidal ideation, physically harmful aggression or dangerous fire setting but not in the past 24 hours. And 3, there is acute homicidal ideation with a plan or physically harmful aggression or command hallucinations that involve the harm of others, or the child set a fire that placed others at significant risk of harms. And as I said, this triggers a module, which is the violence needs module. And I'm going to scroll down and show you the back of your CANS form, where the violence needs module is, and here it is. The violence needs module has several subparts, has the historic risk factors, emotional behavioral risks, and resiliency factors. So let's look at them. Here we go. Violence needs module. The first one is history of physical abuse in the historic risk factors. So let's look a little bit about the criteria for scoring. So here we're going to rate the lifetime of the child, all right? See, lifetime of the child across the board, over the lifetime of the child. That's why they're called historic. It should be historical. 0, no evidence that the child has experienced physical abuse. 1, there's suspicion that there was physical abuse, but no confirming evidence, just like we saw in sexual abuse. In 2, the child has experienced physical abuse on 1 or more occasions. In 3, the child has experienced severe and or repeated physical abuse that has resulted in physical injuries that required medical care. And in 3, that's 3. Child has experienced severe and or repeated physical abuse that has resulted in physical injuries that required medical care. So the next one is history of violence. 0, no evidence. 1, the child has engaged in a minor form or minor forms of violent behavior, including destruction of property and or physical fights in which no one was injured, shoving, wrestling. So the differentiation is if someone was injured, because in 2, the child has engaged in moderate forms of violent behavior, including fights or assaults, in which participants were indeed injured. Cruelty of animal would be rated here, unless it resulted in significant injury or death of the animal, because that would qualify for 3. So besides the cruelty to animals which resulted in significant injury or death to the animal, We would also rate 3 if the child has initiated unprovoked violent behaviors on other people that resulted in injuries. Right? Witnessed domestic violence. In 0, no evidence that the child has witnessed DV. In 1, has witnessed physical violence or repeated threats of violence in the household on at least one occasion, but the violence did not result in injury. In 2, the child has witnessed repeated domestic violence that has resulted in the injury of at least one family member, repeated DV in 2. In 3, it's repeated or severe episode or episode. So one episode of severe family violence qualifies for 3. And significant injuries have occurred as a direct result of the violence. So the violence was severe with physical injuries. The next one is witnessed environmental violence. This is interesting. 0, no evidence, or no evidence that the child watches an excessive amount of violent media. It's a negative qualifier. No evidence that he watches too much violent TV. Or it could also be those games, ¿cómo se dice? The games that kids play on the computer or anywhere else. 1, child has not witnessed violence in her environment, but watches or engages in excessive amount of violent media, including movies and video games. And there's some games that you can actually play that are about fighting and reproducing warlike scenarios. 2, the child has witnessed the violent injury of others in his community. And 3, the child has witnessed the death or the rape of another person in his community. So the next submodule that is triggered is emotional behavioral risks. It is within the violence needs supplemental module. And these are based on the past 30 days, okay? Past 30 days. So first one is frustration management. I really like this one. 0, child appears to manage frustration well. There's no evidence of problems in this regard. 1, some mild problems with frustration. He may anger easily when frustrated. However, he's able to calm himself after an angry outburst. In 2, problems managing frustration. His anger when frustrated is causing functioning problems in school, at home, or with peers. The difference with 3 is that when the child has problems managing frustration, he becomes explosive and dangerous to others. And he demonstrates little self-control in those situations, and others must intervene to restore control. The next one is hostility. The child appears to not experience or express hostility except in situations where most people would become hostile, and that's a 0. 1, child appears hostile but does not express it, contains it, right? Others experience the child as being angry, but he doesn't express it. In 2, the child expresses hostility regularly. And in 3, the child is almost always hostile, either in expression or appearance, and others may experience the child as full of rage or seething. The next item on the cans is paranoid thinking. 0, the child does not appear to engage in any paranoid thinking. 1, the child is suspicious of others, but is able to test out these suspicions and adjust their thinking, right, appropriately. It's like, yeah, he's out to get me, but no, not really. He's a nice guy kind of thing. 2, child believes that others are out to get him, has trouble accepting that these beliefs may not be accurate, and at times is suspicious and guarded, at other times can be open and friendly, right? Suspicions may be allayed with reassurance, but it's not internal. It has to come out. It has to come from outside. In 1, the child is able to talk himself out of those paranoid thoughts. In 3, however, the child actually believes that others plan to cause him harm and is nearly always suspicious and guarded. Right. And the next one is secondary gains from aggressive behaviors. And the aggressive behaviors may be verbal or physical. And we continue to rate the child in the past 30 days. 0, does not engage in aggressive behavior, either verbal or physical. In 1, unintentionally has benefited from aggressive behavior. However, there's no evidence that the child intentionally uses aggression to achieve a desired outcome. In 2, the child sometimes uses aggression to actually achieve an outcome with the parents, with the caregivers, with teachers or peers. He uses aggression gainfully. And in 3, he uses aggression routinely to achieve desired outcomes with parents, caregivers, teachers, or peers. And people are intimidated actually by the child. The next one is violent thinking. In 0, no evidence that the youth engages in violent thinking. In 1, some occasional or minor thoughts about violence. In 2, the youth has violent thoughts. His language is often characterized as having violent themes, and the way that he problem solves often refers to violent outcomes or using violence in his thinking to solve problems. And in 3, youth has specific homicidal ideation. So to solve his problem, he thinks about killing people, or he appears obsessed with thoughts about violence. For example, a youth who spontaneously and frequently draws only violent images may be rated here. That gives credence to actually looking at the books that children have in school and the themes that they paint and they draw. And the last sub-module of this supplemental module is resiliency factors. All right, so the first one is aware of violence potential, how aware the child is of his own violence potential. 0 is that the child is fully aware of his level of risk, knows and understands the risk factors, and he accepts responsibility for the past and for the future behaviors, is able to anticipate future challenging circumstances. I'm not going to hang out with them, or I'm not going to start arguing with my mother because I know that if I go down this route, it's going to get hairy. In 1, the child is generally aware of the potential for violence, is knowledgeable about the risk factors, and is generally able to take responsibility. And the child may be unable to anticipate the future circumstances that may challenge him. In 2, the child has some awareness of his potential for violence, but tends to blame others, and sometimes able to accept some responsibility. So tends to blame others and other times accepts responsibility. And in 3, no awareness for his potential of violence, denies past violent acts or explains them in terms of justice or as deserved by the victim. The next one is how the child responds to consequences. In 0, child is clearly and predictably responsive to the identified consequences and regularly able to anticipate the consequences and adjust behavior, right? In 1, generally responsive to the consequences. However, not all likely consequences have been identified, or he may sometimes fail to anticipate consequences. So watchful eye, prevent. Education, mostly psychoeducation. 2, the child responds to consequences on some occasions, but sometimes does not appear to care about the consequences for his violent behavior. And in 3, the child is responsive to the consequences. Sorry, that was wrong. The child is unresponsive to the consequences for his violent behavior. And we keep rating for the past 30 days. The next one is commitment to self-control. Fully committed to controlling his violent behaviors is a 0. 1, generally committed to controlling violent behavior. However, he may continue to struggle with control when the circumstances are challenging. 2, the child is ambivalent about controlling his violent behavior. I don't know if I want to do that. And 3, the child is not interested in controlling his behavior. That is, I don't want to do it. Not interested in controlling his violent behavior. Finally, the last one in the resiliency factors sub-module of violence needs is treatment involvement. 0, child fully involved in his own treatment, and the family supports treatment as well. In 1, the child or the family are involved in treatment, but not both, and that's never good. 2, the child and the family are ambivalent about treatment involvement. The child and or the family may be skeptical. So when one of the two is skeptical about treatment effectiveness or suspicious about the intentions of the clinician. And 3, both the child and the family are disinterested in being involved in treatment. A child with treatment needs who is not currently in treatment would be rated here. So for some reason the child is not coming to treatment. We don't know if it's the child who doesn't want to come or the parent who doesn't want to come, but if they're not coming to treatment, they should be scored a 3 here. All right, so the next item in the cans, let's go back to the form, is sexually aggressive, sexually aggressive behavior, and that's module number 5. So here we are, sexual aggression. 0, no evidence of any history of sexually aggressive behavior, no sexual activity with younger children, with non-consenting others, or with children who are not able to understand what consent means. 1 is a history of sexually aggressive behavior, not in the past year, or sexually inappropriate behavior in the past year that troubles others, such as harassing talk or excessive masturbation. 2, the child has engaged in sexually aggressive behavior in the past year, but not in the past 30 days. And 3, the child has engaged in sexually aggressive behavior in the past 30 days. And as I said, this triggers a submodule. And here it goes. We're going to be rating relationship with the victim, and we will rate the most serious episode of sexual aggressive inappropriate behavior in the past year. So what do we rate, right? The most serious episode of sexual aggressive or inappropriate behavior in the past year. In 0, no evidence of victimizing others, all parties in sexual activity appear to be consenting, no power differential. 1, although parties appear to be consenting, there is a significant power differential between the parties in the sexual activity with this child, or there's an adolescent, or the child is an adolescent and is in a position of authority. In 2, child is clearly victimizing at least one other individual with sexually abusive behavior. And in 3, the child is severely victimizing at least one other individual with sexually abusive behavior. This may include physical harm that results from either the sexual behavior or physical force associated with sexual behavior. The next sub-item, and let's look at the sexual aggressive behavior in the actual cans, and here we are. We just did relationship. The next one is physical force or threat. Here we are. And again, we continue to rate the most serious episode of sexual aggressive or inappropriate behavior in the past year. So in 0, there was no evidence of the use of any physical force or threat of force in either the commission of the sex act or in attempting to hide it. In 1, there's evidence of the use of a threat of force in an attempt to discourage the victim from reporting the sex act. In 2, there's evidence of the use of mild to moderate force in the sex act. There is some physical harm or risk of physical harm in the victim. And in 3, there's evidence of severe physical force in the commission of the sex act, and the victim was harmed or at risk for physical harm from the use of force. The next item in this supplemental module is planning. 0 means that there was no evidence of planning, and again, we keep scoring the most serious episode of sexual aggressive or inappropriate behavior in the past year. 0, no evidence of planning. 1, some evidence of efforts to get into a situation where there would be opportunities for sexual activity. 2, evidence of some planning of sex activity. 3, considerable evidence of predatory sexual behavior in which the victim is identified prior to the act and the act is premeditated. The next item is age differential. Again, most serious episode of sexual behavior in the past year. 0, ages of the perpetrator and victim and or participants essentially equivalent, less than 3 years apart. 1, age differential between perpetrator and victim or participants is 3 to 4 years differential. 2, the age differential is at least 5 years, but the perpetrator is less than 13 years old. And 3, the age differential between the perpetrator and the victim is at least 5 years, and the perpetrator is 13 years or older himself. The next item in this supplemental module is the types of sex act. In 0, again, most serious episode of sexual aggressive inappropriate behavior in past year. That's what we're rating. In 0, the act involves touching or fondling only. In 1, the act involves fondling plus possible penetration with fingers or oral sex. In 2, the act involves penetration into genitalia or anus with body part. And in 3, the act involves physically dangerous penetration due to referential size or use of an object. The next item is how the child responded to the accusation. Here we are rating the highest level from the past 30 days. So what's happening in the past 30 days? How is the child reacting to the accusation, right? In 0, the child admits to behavior and expresses remorse and desire to not repeat. In 1, the child partially admits to the behavior and expresses some remorse. In 2, the child admits to behavior but does not express remorse. In 3, the child neither admits to behavior nor expresses remorse, and the child is in complete denial. The next item is history of sexual behavior. And this is history of sexual abusive behavior towards others, and we rate the lifetime of the child. 0. The child or adolescent has only one incident of sexually abusive behavior that has been identified or investigated. In 1, there's 2 or 3 incidents of sexually abusive behavior that have been identified or investigated. Notice, please, that we say identified or investigated. In 2, the child or adolescent has 4 to 10 incidents of sexually abusive behavior that have been identified and or investigated, and there is more than one victim. In 3, the child or adolescent has more than 10 incidents of sexually abusive behavior with more than one victim. The next item is severity of sexual abuse. And we again are rating within the lifetime. 0. No history of any form of sexual abuse. 1. History of occasional fondling or being touched inappropriately, however, not occurring in a regular basis or by someone in a caregiver capacity, or there's a suspicion of a history of sexual abuse without confirming evidence. In 2, this level 2 is to indicate a moderate level of sexual abuse. This may involve a child who has been fondled on an ongoing basis or has been sexually penetrated anally or genitally once by someone not in a caregiver capacity. And 3 indicates a severe level of sexual abuse involving penetration on an ongoing basis by someone either in a caregiver capacity or in a close emotional relation to the child. So basically, we're talking about the severity of the sexual abuse that the child has experienced. Okay, prior treatment for these issues. Okay. No history of prior treatment or history of outpatient treatment with notable possible outcomes. 1. History of outpatient treatment which has had some degree of success. 2. History residential treatment where there has been successful completion of program. And 3. History of residential or outpatient treatment condition with little or no success. All right then, so the next item on the front of the cans talks about runaway. So we're going to stop the recording now, and the next clip will continue with child risk behaviors, and we'll pick it up on runaway behaviors.